So you want to own a banana plantation. Buy a stretch of flat ground somewhere warm and wet. Put the plants in. Wait for the bunches to come up green and heavy. Cut them down. Box them. Put them on a ship. And every supermarket on Earth is already waiting for them. Because bananas are the most eaten fruit on the planet, and nobody ever stops buying them. That's the picture. Warm rain, endless green, a crop that seems to grow itself, and a customer base of basically everybody. Here's the problem with that picture. Bananas are the cheapest thing in the supermarket. They have been the cheapest thing in the supermarket your entire life. A pound of bananas costs less today, in real terms, than it did when your grandparents were shopping. Meanwhile, the diesel, the fertilizer, the fungicide, the labor, the shipping, the plastic bags that go over each bunch, every single one of those has gone up. So you are looking at a business where the cost of production has climbed for 50 years, and the price at the shelf has essentially refused to move. Somebody is absorbing that gap, and the moment you buy a plantation, that somebody is you. The truth is, a banana plantation is not really a farm. It is a logistics operation with a plant attached. The fruit is cut green, hard, and unripe. And from that moment, there is a clock running that you cannot stop, cannot slow down, and cannot negotiate with. Everything about how this business makes money and how it quietly destroys people comes out of that one fact. Let's start with what you're actually buying, because there isn't one kind of banana operation. There are several, and they are barely the same business. At the bottom, you have the smallholder, a few hectares, family labor, selling into a local market or to a middleman who shows up in a truck. That grower isn't in the export business at all. Above that sits the independent commercial farm, maybe 30 to a few hundred hectares, growing export-grade fruit under contract to somebody else's brand. This is the tier most people who buy a plantation actually end up in. Then there's the affiliated estate, thousands of hectares, tied by long-term contract to one of the big fruit multinationals, sometimes owned outright by them. And at the far end, the fully integrated operation, where the same company owns the land, the packing plants, the refrigerated ships, the ripening rooms in the destination country, and the brand sticker that goes on the fruit. Each of those is a different bet. The independent grower is selling a commodity into a market where somebody else sets the price. The integrated player owns the whole chain and captures margin at every step. That difference, who owns the chain, is the single most important thing in this entire business, and we're going to come back to it. Now the land. Bananas are picky in a way that eliminates most of the world immediately. You need heat, year-round, no frost ever. You need something like 2,500 millimeters of rain a year, or irrigation to make up the difference. You need deep soil that drains, because a banana plant is essentially a giant herb with a shallow root system, and it will drown in standing water. And critically, you need to be near a port with cold chain infrastructure, because a plantation 8 hours from a refrigerated terminal is a plantation whose fruit arrives as garbage. That combination of requirements narrows the planet down to a thin band, and inside that band, the good ground is already owned. Prices vary enormously by country. Established, planted, irrigated export land in a prime growing region in Latin America can run tens of thousands of dollars a hectare. Cheaper ground exists, but the cheap ground is cheap, for the same reason cheap ground is always cheap. It's too far from the port, or the drainage is wrong, or the rainfall is unreliable, or the security situation makes lenders nervous. Then you have to establish the thing, and this is where the number surprises people. Land clearing, laser leveling, and drainage. Drainage above all, because you will be cutting canals across the entire property, and on heavy ground that alone can run thousands of dollars a hectare. Irrigation, usually overhead or under canopy, laid across the whole block. Windbreaks, because a banana plant carrying 40 kilos of fruit on a soft stem is one storm away from lying flat. Planting material, and if you're serious, you're buying tissue-cultured plantlets from a laboratory rather than suckers from a neighbor, because suckers carry disease. Then the propping. Every plant carrying a bunch has to be physically held up with twine or bamboo, because the plant is not strong enough to hold its own fruit. One recent Ecuadorian industry study put the annual cost of running a hectare of export bananas at more than $14,500, and the largest single line in that figure was not fertilizer or chemicals. It was direct labor, at nearly $7,000 a hectare. And then you wait. A newly planted banana takes roughly 9 to 12 months to give you a first harvestable bunch. 12 months of spending with nothing coming back. It's worth pausing on what a banana plant actually is, because it explains a lot of the cost structure. It is not a tree. There's no wood in it. What looks like a trunk is a tightly rolled column of leaf bases, and the whole thing is basically a giant herb that shoots up to 5 or 6 meters in under a year. It fruits exactly once. One plant, one bunch, and then that stem is finished forever and gets cut down. What keeps the operation going is the underground rhizome, which pushes up new shoots, and you select one of them to be the next plant. So a plantation is not a stand of trees you tend for 30 years. It's a rolling relay, with a new generation coming up behind every plant that fruits, continuously, all year, in every block. That's why the labor never stops, and why there is no off-season to catch your breath in. It's also why the whole field ages. Yields decline as the mats get old, and disease pressure accumulates in the soil, so at some point, typically somewhere between year 8 and year 15, depending on how hard you've pushed it, you have to tear out a block and replant it. Which means going back to zero on that ground for another year while it produces nothing. And this is the part almost nobody outside the industry budgets for at all: the packing station. Bananas are not harvested into a truck and driven to a warehouse. The bunch is cut and it moves to the packing shed hanging from an overhead cable system, a network of steel cables strung across the entire farm, because a bruised banana is a rejected banana, and a rejected banana is worth zero. At the shed, the hands are cut off the stem, washed in tanks to stop the latex bleeding, graded, weighed, stickered, and packed into standard boxes. There's a corrugated box plant somewhere supplying you at scale. There's a wastewater system. There's a loading dock, refrigerated transport to the port, and a booked slot on a reefer vessel. Building that infrastructure across a serious commercial block is a 7-figure exercise before you've shipped a single container. And the reason all of it exists is the clock. The fruit is cut green because green fruit travels. It goes into a container held around 13 degrees Celsius with the atmosphere controlled to slow respiration, and it will hold for something like 3 to 4 weeks. If the cold chain breaks anywhere, at the shed, on the road, on the ship, at the port, the fruit ripens in transit and arrives as a container full of mush. Nobody pays you for that. So now you're operational, and the bills start. Labor is the biggest one, and it never stops, because bananas don't have a season. There is no harvest month. Every week of every year, somebody is cutting, hauling, packing, and shipping, and somebody else is out in the field doing the maintenance. Deleafing, removing diseased leaves by hand. Debudding, cutting the flower off the end of each bunch. Bagging, sliding a treated plastic sleeve over every single developing bunch to protect it from insects and abrasion. Propping every plant. Desuckering, cutting away the extra shoots so each mat produces one good stem at a time. All of it by hand, on foot, on every plant, forever. Then the spraying. Black Sigatoka is a leaf fungus that kills the plant's ability to photosynthesize, and in a wet tropical climate, it is relentless. Controlling it means aerial fungicide applications on a cycle that can run dozens of times a year, sometimes every week or two, in bad conditions. That is aircraft, chemicals, pilots, and licensing on repeat, permanently. And the fungus adapts. Resistance builds, so the product mix has to keep changing, which is why people in this industry call it a treadmill. You don't ever beat Sigatoka. You rent control of it, annually, and the rent goes up. Costa Rica's own producer association reported the harvest dropping from about 125 million boxes in 2024 to roughly 112 million in 2025, and pointed at Sigatoka pressure as the reason. That is a 10% national production loss to a leaf fungus in a country that has been fighting it professionally for a century. Now the revenue, and this is where the fantasy runs into arithmetic. You sell by the box, and the standard export box holds about 18.5 kilos, call it 40 pounds of fruit. Yield varies enormously by how good you are. The Ecuadorian national average sits around 2,000 boxes per hectare per year. Top-tier technified operations there have reported 4,000. Guatemalan and Philippine producers have historically run higher than the Ecuadorian average as well. So take a well-run 100-hectare farm at, say, 2,500 boxes a hectare. That's 250,000 boxes a year. Now, the price. Ecuador is one of the few places on Earth that legally sets a floor. The government convenes producers and exporters every year and fixes a minimum support price the grower must be paid at the ship. That price was $6.85 in 2024. It went to $7.25 in 2025. For 2026, it was set at $7.75. Read those numbers again. Over 3 years, the legally mandated grower price moved 90 cents. Not 90%. 90 cents. 250,000 boxes at $7.75 is about $1,900,000 in gross revenue. Against that, if your all-in cost is running in the neighborhood of $14,000 to $15,000 a hectare, that's roughly $1.5 million in costs, which leaves you a few $100,000 before debt service on the land, before anything goes wrong. And in a year when the market softens and buyers refuse to pay the official price, or a wet season knocks your yield down 15%, that margin doesn't shrink, it inverts. And notice what just happened there. You did not set that price. A negotiating table did. And then international buyers decided whether to actually honor it. When Ecuador raised its minimum to $7.25 for 2025, exporters reported that European buyers pushed back and refused the new number, and contracts went unsigned into December. That is the structural trap of this business. The banana grower is a price taker in almost the purest form that exists in agriculture. Historically, 3 companies, Chiquita, Dole, and Del Monte, controlled around 65% of world banana exports in the 1980s. That concentration has actually loosened. By 2013, the top 3 were down to about 37%, and the top 5 to around 44%. But the power didn't disappear, it moved. It moved to the supermarkets. The big grocery chains in North America and Europe now buy in enormous volume, often direct, and they use bananas as a loss leader, a price signal product they keep artificially cheap to pull shoppers through the door. Which means the shelf price of a banana is not set by what it costs to grow one. It is set by a marketing decision made in a retail head office thousands of miles away. And every cent of pressure that decision creates travels back down the chain until it reaches the only person who cannot pass it on to anyone else, the grower. And it's worth being concrete about how that shelf price divides up, because the split is the whole story. Work backwards from a banana in a European or North American supermarket. Out of what the shopper pays, the retailer takes the largest share, typically somewhere approaching or above 40%. The ripener, the importer, and the shipping line take another substantial slice for the refrigerated vessel, the port handling, the ripening rooms, and the distribution. Tariffs and duties take a cut in some markets. What lands back with the producing country, covering the farm, the packing, the boxes, and the wages of everybody who touched the fruit, is commonly in the low double digits as a percentage of the retail price. And out of that small remainder, the plantation still has to pay for the fungicide program, the labor, the drainage, the cable system, and the debt. This is why campaigns about banana pricing exist at all, and why Ecuador felt the need to write a minimum grower price into national law in the first place. You do not legislate a price floor for an industry where the producers have leverage. Then there is the weather, and here the plant's own anatomy works against you. A mature banana carrying a full bunch is a top-heavy column of leaf tissue with a shallow root plate, and it is one of the least wind-resistant crops in commercial agriculture. A tropical storm does not damage a banana plantation. It flattens it. A single hurricane passing over your blocks can take out a year of production in an afternoon, and then you're not just missing the revenue, you're paying to clear and replant thousands of downed plants while the packing shed sits idle, and the workforce you cannot afford to lose has nothing to do. And unlike the diseases, this one doesn't build slowly enough to plan around. It arrives on a weather forecast with about 72 hours of notice. Insurance exists in some markets, it is expensive, and in the highest risk zones, it is either unavailable or priced at a level that tells you precisely what the underwriters think of your odds. Now here's the part that should genuinely unsettle you, and it's the reason this business is unlike any other crop on earth. Every export banana you have ever eaten is the same banana. Not the same variety in the loose sense, the same plant. Cavendish bananas are propagated vegetatively, from shoots, not from seed, which means they are clones. Genetically near-identical individuals, planted across millions of hectares in dozens of countries, accounting for around 99% of the global export trade. There is no genetic diversity in the export banana. There is one organism, distributed globally, and we know exactly what happens to that arrangement, because it has already happened once. The export banana before Cavendish was a variety called Gros Michel. Bigger, sweeter, better shipping fruit. And it was the entire industry. Then a soil fungus called Fusarium wilt, known in the trade as Panama disease, moved through the plantations of Central America. It couldn't be sprayed away because it lives in the soil and enters through the roots. There was no cure. Companies abandoned infected land and moved on to clean ground, and then the fungus caught up with them there too. By the 1950s, the Gros Michel export trade was finished. The industry survived by switching the entire planet over to Cavendish, which happened to be resistant to that strain. And then, having been saved by genetic luck once, the industry replanted the identical mistake at global scale. Which brings us to Tropical Race 4. TR4 is a strain of the same Fusarium fungus that Cavendish is not resistant to. It was identified in Taiwanese soil in the early 1990s, spread through Southeast Asia and Australia, reached the Middle East and Africa by 2013, and then, in 2019, it was confirmed in Colombia, 175 hectares on the Guajira Peninsula. Colombia declared a national emergency. It reached Peru in 2021 and Venezuela in 2023. Since 2018, the number of affected countries has gone from 16 to 23. Here is what makes it different from every other agricultural problem in this script. Fungicides do not work on it. The spores survive in soil for up to 30 years with no host plant present. It moves on contaminated boots, tools, vehicle tires, irrigation water, and soil on machinery. And once your ground has it, you cannot replant Cavendish on that ground. Not next season, not in a decade. So the question you are actually asking when you buy a banana plantation is not whether you can farm well. It's whether the fungus arrives during your ownership. If it does, the value of your asset is not reduced. Your land stops being banana land, permanently, and everything you built on it, the cable system, the packing shed, the drainage, becomes infrastructure for a crop you can no longer grow. And if the biology doesn't get you, the politics might. Look at what happened in Panama in 2025. Chiquita's operation in Bocas del Toro was the anchor of that entire region's economy, in a country where bananas had become the top export after a copper mine was shut down by court order. In April, workers went on strike over a national pension reform. The strike held. Roads were blocked. In late May, Chiquita fired its daily workers, thousands of them, saying they had abandoned their posts and that the company had lost at least $75 million. Management left the country by early June. The remaining workers were dismissed in July. A province of over 100,000 people lost its primary employer inside about 8 weeks. It was eventually resolved, an agreement was signed, Workers were rehired in stages, and production restarted. But hold on to what that episode demonstrates. The plantation is a fixed asset, bolted to a specific piece of ground in a specific country. The buyer is not. The buyer can source the identical commodity from 4 other countries by the end of the quarter. When labor conflict, currency trouble, a tariff change, or a political shift makes your country inconvenient, the fruit company can leave, and the land, the drainage canals, the cable system, and the workforce cannot follow it. So let's put a full year on the table, both versions. The good year. Rainfall behaves, the storms miss you, Sigatoka stays controllable at normal spray intervals, and you hit 2,500 boxes a hectare across 100 hectares. You signed contracts at the official price, and your buyer honored them. Gross revenue around 1.9 million. Costs land near 1.5 million. You clear something in the range of $300,000 to $400,000 before financing, on an asset that cost you several million to assemble. That is a real return, a single-digit one, and it is what a well-run plantation looks like when everything cooperates. Now the realistic year. Nothing exotic happens. A wetter-than-normal season raises Sigatoka pressure, so your spray cycle tightens, and your chemical and aviation bill climbs by a quarter. The same weather knocks fruit weight down, so more units are needed to fill a box, and your box count comes in 15% under plan. Your buyer, facing a supermarket that refuses a price increase, negotiates hard and pays at the floor rather than above it, and takes a fussier line on quality, so your rejection rate at the packing shed goes up. Revenue drops toward 1.5 million. Costs climb toward 1.7. You are now losing $200,000 in a year where absolutely nothing dramatic happened. No fungus, no hurricane, no strike. Just ordinary weather and a firm buyer. The swing between those 2 years is more than $500,000 on the same land, with the same plants, farmed by the same people. And that's the honest shape of it. A banana plantation is a business where you carry every risk that exists: biological, meteorological, political, and financial, and you hold almost none of the pricing power. You do the hardest, most labor-intensive, most disease-exposed part of the chain, on land that one soil fungus can retire permanently, and then you sell into a market whose price is set by a retail promotion strategy in another hemisphere. The people who make real money in bananas are not usually the people growing them. They're the ones who own the ships, the ripening rooms, the brand, and the shelf space. So if you still want to own a banana plantation, understand exactly what you're signing up for. Next time you're standing in a supermarket looking at that price, the one that never seems to change no matter what else does, remember that the price didn't stay low because bananas got cheaper to grow. It stayed low because somebody at the other end of the chain absorbed the difference, and you are about to volunteer.